Here we go. The poor Miller boys and the cat. Let me know how the music is, if it's too loud, not loud enough. In a certain mill lived an old miller who had neither wife nor child. It's on this pocket. 3 apprentices served under him. As they had been with him several years, one day said to them, I am old and want to sit in the chimney corner. Go out, and whichever of you brings me the best horse, to him I will give the mill, and in return for it he shall take care of me till my death. The third of the boys was, however, the drudge, who was looked on as foolish by the others. They begrudged the mill to him, and afterwards he would not have it. Then all 3 went out together, and when they came to the village, the 2 said to stupid Hans, You may just as well stay here. As long as you live, you will never get a horse. Hans, however, went with them, and when it was night, they came to a cave in which they lay down to sleep. The 2 sharp ones waited until Hans had fallen asleep. Then they got up and went away, leaving him where he was. They thought they had done a very clever thing, but it was certain to turn out ill for them. When the sun arose and Hans woke up, he was lying in a deep cavern. He looked around on every side and exclaimed, Oh, alas, where am I? Then he got up and clambered out of the cave into the forest, thinking, Here I am, quite alone and deserted. How shall I obtain a horse now? Whilst he was thus walking full of thought, he met a small tabby cat, which said quite kindly, Hans, where are you going? Okay, Max. Sleep, or have fun, sweet baby. I almost said sleep well, but have fun with your friends and have a beautiful day. Thank you for stopping by and checking on your old mother. Oh, me leaving soon. Yeah, I am. I know, it's story time. I know it's sad. But at least we get these few moments together. Whilst he was thus walking full of thought, he met a small tabby cat, which said quite kindly, Hans, where are you going? Alas, you cannot help me. Oh, that's beautiful, Congo. Don't cry because it's over. Smile because it happened. Well, this is one. I well know you desire, said the cat. You wish to have a beautiful horse. Come with me and be my faithful servant for 7 years, and then I'll give you a horse more beautiful than any you have ever seen in your whole life. Well, this is a wonderful cat, thought Hans, but I'm determined to see if she's telling the truth. So she took him with her into her enchanted castle, where there were nothing but cats who were her servants. They leapt nimbly upstairs and downstairs and were merry and happy. In the evening, when they sat down to dinner, 3 of them had to make music. One played the bassoon, the other the fiddle, and the third put the trumpet to his lips and blew out his cheeks as much as he possibly could. I always do. Chat pulls me out. When they had dined, the table was carried away, and the cat said, Now, Hans, come and dance with me. No, said he, I won't dance with a pussy-cat. I have never done that. Then take him to bed, said she to the cat. So one of them lighted him to his bedroom, and one pulled his shoes off, and one his stockings, and at last one of them blew out the candle. Next morning they returned and helped him out of bed. One put his stockings on for him, one tied his garters, and one brought his shoes. One washed him, one dried his face with her tail. That feels very soft, said Hans. He, however, had to serve the cat and chop some wood every day, and to that he had an axe of silver, while the wedge while the wedge and saw were of silver and the mallet of copper. So he chopped the wood small. He stayed there in the house, and had good meat and drink, but never saw anyone but the tabby cat and her servants. Once she said to him, "Go and mow my meadow, and dry the grass," and gave him a scythe of silver and a whetstone of gold, but bade him deliver them up again carefully. So Hans went thither, and did what he was bidden, and when he had finished the work, he carried the scythe, wellstone, and hay to the house, and asked if it was not yet time for him, and asked if it was not yet time for her to give him his reward. "No," said the cat, "he must first do something more for me of same kind. There is timber of silver, carpenter's axe, square, and everything that is needful, all of silver. With these build me a small house. With these build me a small house." Then Hans built the small house, and said that he had now done everything, and still he had no horse. Nevertheless, the 7 years had gone by with him as if they were 6 months, and the cat asked him if he would like to see her horse. "Yes," said Hans, and she opened the door of the small house, and when she had opened it, there stood 12 horses, such horses so bright and shining that his heart rejoiced at the sight of them. And now she gave him to eat and drink, and said, "Go home, I'll not give you your horse to take away with you, but in 3 days' time I will follow you, and I will bring it." So Hans set out, and she showed him the way to the mill. She had, however, never once given him a new coat, and he had been obliged to keep on his dirty old smock frock, which he had brought with him, and which during the 7 years had everywhere become too small for him. When he reached home, the 2 other apprentices were there again, and each of them certainly had brought a horse with them. But one of them was blind, and the other lame. They asked Hans where his horse was. "It will follow me in 3 days' time." Then they laughed and said, "Indeed, stupid Hans, where will you get a horse? It'll be a fine one." Hans went into the parlor, but the miller said he should not sit down to the table, for he was so ragged and torn that they would all be ashamed they would all be ashamed of him if anyone came in. So they gave him a mouthful of food outside. At night, when they went to rest, the 2 others would not let him have a bed, and at last he was forced to creep into the goose house and lie down on a little hard straw. In the morning, when he awoke, the 3 days had passed, and a coach came with 6 horses, and they shone so bright that it was delightful to see them. And a servant brought a 7th as well, which was for the poor miller's boy. And a magnificent princess alighted from the coach and went into the mill, and this princess was the little tabby cat, whom poor Hans had served for 7 years. She asked the miller where the miller's boy and drudge was. Then the miller said, "We will not have him here in the mill. He is ragged. He is lying in the goose house." Then the king's daughter said that they were to fetch him immediately. So they brought him, and he had to hold his little smock together to cover himself. Her servants unpacked splendid garments and washed him and dressed him, and when it was done, no king could have looked more handsome. Then the princess desired to see the horses, which the other apprentices had brought him with them. One of them was blind, and the other lame, so she ordered her servants to bring the 7th horse. When the miller saw it, he said, "Such a horse as that had never before entered his yard." "And that is for the 3rd miller's boy," said she. "Then he must have the mill," said the miller. But the princess said the horse was for himself, and that he was to keep his mills as well. Then she took her faithful Hans, set him in the coach, and drove away with him. They first drove to the little house, which she had built with the silver tools. Behold, it was a great castle. Everything inside it was of silver and gold. Then she married him, and he was rich, so rich that he had enough for all the rest of his life. After this, let no one say that anyone who is silly can never become a person of importance. Wow. Oh, that one was interesting. That definitely, that definitely, the last little, that was the moral of the story, that someone who's silly can't become someone who's important. Wasn't there a Hans? There's a Hansel. We did Hansel. I feel like I read Red Cap. Yeah, we read that one because it like jumped forward. Aww. Aww. You're so sweet, Storm Glider. Thank you so much for gift. Oh, and that's adorable. You gifted a subscription to my mom. Miss Wonderland Girl is my mom. You're so sweet. Thank you so much, Storm Glider. That would be your great grandmother, Max. Oh no, that would just be your grandmother, Max. Aw, thank you, Storm Glider. I really appreciate it. Yeah, I'm really glad you joined my community. You and Micah. It's awesome to see you both here. It's awesome to see other gamers. I hope we can find some kind of game we can all play together. It's awesome. Yeah, and to find Chelsea too. Yeah. Well, I know you know, Max, but it was the first time I've said it out loud. I know that's weird that you. That's so funny. Look into grounded. Okay, grounded. Yay, Miss Wonderland, you just got a sub. Now you can use the emotes. So in the chat section, you should be able to use my emotes. Um, yeah, you'll figure it out, and I'll show you if you don't. Okay, I read the Golden Little Snow White. Did I read Little Snow White? Oh, it's really long though. I don't know if I want to read Little Snow White because that's a commitment. Okay, you ready? We're gonna read Little Snow White, and then that's gonna be our last story, and then we're done. Okay. Little Snow White. Once upon a time in the middle of winter, when the flakes of snow were falling like feathers from the sky, a queen sat at a window sewing, and the frame of the window was made of black ebony. And while she was sewing and looking out of the window at the snow, she pricked her finger with the needle, and 3 drops of blood fell upon the snow. And the red looked pretty upon the white snow, and she thought to herself, would that I had a child as white as snow, as red as blood, and as black as the wood of window frame. Soon after that, she had a little daughter who was as white as snow and as red as blood, and her hair was as black as ebony. She was therefore called Little Snow White, and when the child was born, the queen died. Oh, Wednesday Addams, yes. I love it. Oh, that sounds really cool, Stormglider. That sounds super cool. Maybe you can share like a trailer for that in things to watch section on my Discord. After a year had passed, the king took to himself another wife. She was a beautiful woman, but proud and haughty, and she could not bear that anyone else should surpass her in beauty. She had a wonderful looking glass, and when she stood in front of it and looked at herself in it and said, looking glass on the wall, who in this land is the fairest of all? The looking glass answered, thou, O queen, art the fairest of all. And she was satisfied, for she knew that the looking glass spoke the truth. But little Snow White was growing up and grew more and more beautiful. When she was 7 years old, she was beautiful as the day and more beautiful than the queen herself. And once the queen asked her looking glass, looking glass on the wall, who in this land is the fairest of all? It answered, thou art fairer than all who are here, Lady Queen, but more beautiful still is Snow White, I ween. Then being shocked and turned yellow and green with envy. From that hour, whenever she looked at little Snow White, her heart heaved in her breast. She hated the maiden so much. And envy and pride grew higher and higher in her heart like a weed, so that she had no peace day or night. She called a huntsman and said, Take the child away into the forest. I will no longer have her in my sight. Kill her." The huntsman obeyed and took her away. But when he had drawn his knife and was about to pierce little Snow White's innocent heart, she began to weep and said, "Ah, dear huntsman, leave me. Leave me, my life. Leave me, my life. I will run away into the wild forest and never come home again." And as she was so beautiful, the huntsman had pity on her and said, "Run away then, you poor child, and the wild beasts will soon have devoured you," thought he. And yet it seemed as if a stone had been rolled from his heart, since it was no longer needful for him to kill her. But now the poor child was all alone in the great forest and so terrified. It's true. She looked at every leaf of every tree and did not know what to do. Then she began to run and ran over sharp stones and through thorns, and the wild beasts ran past her but did her no harm. She ran as long as her feet would go until it was almost evening, and she saw a little cottage and went into it to rest herself. Everything in the cottage was small but neater and cleaner than could be told. There was a table in which was a white cover and 7 little plates, and on each plate a little spoon. Moreover, there were 7 little knives and forks and 7 little mugs. Against the wall stood 7 little beds side by side and covered with Snow White's counterpanes. Little Snow White was so hungry and thirsty that she ate some vegetables and bread from each plate and drank a drop of wine out of each mug, for she did not wish to take all from one only. Then, as she was so tired, she laid herself down on one of the little beds. But none of them suited her. One was too long, another too short, but at last she found that the 7th one was right, so she remained in it and said a prayer and went to sleep. When it was quite dark, the owner of the cottage came back, and they were 7 dwarves who dug and delved in the mountains for ore. They lit their 7 candles, and as it was now light within the cottage, they saw that someone had been there, for everything was not in the same order in which they had left it. The first said, "Who has been sitting on my chair?" The second said, "Who has been eating off my plate?" The third said, "Who's been taking some of my bread?" The fourth, "Who's been eating my vegetables?" The fifth, "Who's been using my fork?" The sixth, "Who's been cutting with my knife?" And the seventh, "Who has been drinking out of my mug?" Then the first looked around and saw that there was a little hole in his bed, and he said, "Who's been getting into my bed?" Then the other came up, and each called out, "Somebody has been lying in my bed too." Ah, that was the weird film on my mug. But the 7th, when he looked at his bed, saw little Snow White, who was lying fast asleep therein. And he called the others, who came running up, and they cried out with astonishment, and brought their 7 little candles, and let the light fall on like little Snow White. "Oh, oh," cried they, "what a lovely child!" And they were so glad that they did not wake her up, but let her sleep on in a bed. The 7th dwarf slept with his companions 1 hour with each, and so got through the night. The next morning, little Snow White awoke and was frightened when she saw the 7 dwarfs, but they were friendly and asked her what her name was. "My name's Little Snow White," she answered. "How have you come to our house?" said the dwarf. Then she told them that the wicked queen had wished to have her killed, but the huntsman had spared her life, and that she had run for the whole day until at last she had found their dwelling. The dwarf said, "If you will take care of our house, cook, make the beds, wash, sew, and knit, and if you will keep everything neat and clean, you may stay with us, and you shall want for nothing. Yes, said little Snow White, with all my heart, and she stayed with them. She kept the house in order for them. In the mornings they went to the mountains and looked for copper and gold. In the evenings they came back, and their supper had to be ready. The maiden was alone in the whole day, so the good dwarfs warned her and said, "Beware of the queen. She will soon know that you are here. Be sure to let no one come in." But the queen, believing the Snow White was dead, could not but think that she herself was again the first and most beautiful of all. She went to her looking-glass and said, looking glass on the wall, who in this land is the fairest of all?" And the glass answered, "O queen, thou art fairest of all I see, but over the hill where the seven dwarfs dwell, little Snow White is alive and well, and none is so fair as she." Then she was astounded, for she knew that the looking-glass never spoke falsely, and she knew that the huntsman had betrayed her, for that little Snow White was still alive. And so she thought and thought again how she might kill her, for so long as she herself was not the fairest in the whole land, envy let her have no rest. And when she had at last thought of something to do, she painted her face and dressed herself like an old peddler woman, and no one could have known her. In this disguise she went over to the seven mountains, to the seven dwarfs, and knocked on the door and cried, "Pretty things to sell, very cheap, very cheap." Little Snow White looked out the window and called, "Good day, my dear woman. What have you to sell?" "Good things, pretty things," she answered. "Stay laces of all colors." She pulled out one which was woven of bright-colored silk. "I may let the worthy old woman in," thought little Snow White, and she unbolted the door and bought the pretty laces. "Child," said the woman, "what a fright you look. Come, I will lace you properly for once." Little Snow White had no suspicion, but stood before her and let herself be laced with the new laces. But the old woman laced her so quickly and laced her so tightly that little Snow White lost her breath and fell down as if dead. "Now I am the most beautiful," said the queen to herself, and ran away. Not long after, in the evening, the seven dwarfs came home, but how shocked they were when they saw their dear little Snow White lying on the ground, that she neither stirred nor moved, and seemed to be dead. They lifted her up, and as they saw that she was laced too tightly, they cut the lace. Then she began to breathe a little, and after a while came to life again. When the dwarfs heard what had happened, they said, "The old peddler woman was no one else than the wicked queen. Take care and let no one come in when you are not with you." But the wicked woman, when she had reached home, went in front of the glass and asked, looking glass on the wall, who in this land is the fairest of all?" And it answered as before, "O queen, thou art fairest of all I see, but over the hills where the seven dwarfs dwell, little Snow White is alive and well, and none is so fair as she." When she heard that, all her blood rushed to her heart with fear, for she saw plainly that the little Snow White was again alive. Friggin' snitch glass. "I will think of something that shall put an end to you." And by the help of witchcraft, which she understood, she made a poisonous comb. Then she disguised herself and took the shape of another old woman. So she went over to the seven dwarfs. So she went over the seven mountains, the seven dwarfs, knocked at the door and cried, "Good things still, good things to sell, cheap, cheap." Little Snow White looked out and said, "Go away, I cannot let anyone come in." "I suppose you may look," said the old woman, and pulled the poisonous comb out and held it up. It pleased the maiden so that she let herself be gilded and opened the door. She let herself be beguiled and opened the door. When they had made a bargain, the old woman said, "Now I will comb you properly for once." The poor little Snow White had no suspicion and let the old woman do as she pleased. But hardly had she put the comb in her hair than the poison in it took effect, and the maiden fell down senseless. "You paragon of beauty," said the wicked woman, "you are done for. You are done for now, and she went away. But fortunately, it was almost evening, and the seven dwarfs came home. When they saw the little Snow White lying as if dead upon the ground, they at once suspended the queen. They at once suspected the queen. They looked and found the poison comb. Scarcely had they taken it out when little Snow White came to herself and told them what had happened. Then they warned her once more to be upon her guard and to open the door to no one. The queen at home went to the front of the glass and said, looking glass on the wall, who in this land is the fairest of all? Oh, you know she's gonna. Then it answered as before, O queen, thou art fairest of all I see, but over the hills where the seven dwarfs dwell, little Snow White is alive and well, and none as fair as she. When she heard the glass speak thus, she trembled and shook with rage. Little Snow White shall die, she cried, even if it costs me my life. Thereupon she went to a secret lonely room where no one ever came, and there she found a very poisonous apple. Outside it looked pretty, white with green cheeks, so that everyone who saw it longed for it, but whoever ate a piece of this must surely die. When the apple was ready, she painted her face and dressed herself as a country woman, and so she went over to the seven mountains and the seven dwarfs. She knocked at the door. Little Snow White put her head out the window and said, I cannot let anyone in. The seven dwarfs have forbidden me. It is all the same to me, answered the woman. I shall soon get rid of my apple. There, I will give you one. Oh, said the Snow White, I did not take anything. Are you afraid of poison? Said the old woman. Look, I will cut the apple into pieces. You eat the red cheek, and I will eat the white. And the apple was so cunningly made that only the red cheek was poisoned. Little Snow White longed for the fine apple, and when she saw the woman ate part of it, she could resist no longer and stretched out her hand and took out the poisonous half. But hardly had she bit of it in her mouth than she fell down dead. Then the queen looked at her with a dreadful look and laughed out loud and said, White as snow, red as blood, black as ebony wood. This time the dwarfs cannot wake you up again. And when she asked of the looking-glass at home, looking glass on the wall, who in this land is the fairest of all? It answered, At last, O queen, in this land thou art fairest of all. Then her envious heart had rest, so as far as an envious heart can have rest. The dwarfs, when they came home in the evening, found little Snow White lying upon the ground. She breathed no longer and was dead. They lifted her up, looked to see whether they could find anything poisonous, unlaced her, combed her hair, washed her with water and wine, but it was all of no use. The poor child was dead and remained dead. They laid her upon a bier, and all seven of them sat around and wept for her, and wept for 3 days long. Then they were going to bury her, but she still looked as if she was alive, and still had her pretty red cheeks. They said, We could not bury her in the dark ground. And they had a transparent coffin of glass made so that she might be seen from all sides. They laid her in it and wrote her name upon it in golden letters, and she was a king's daughter. Then they put the coffin out upon the mountains, and one of them always stayed by it to watch it. And birds came too, and wept for little Snow White. First an owl, then a raven, and last a dove. And now little Snow White lay a long, long time in the coffin. She did not change, but looked as if she were asleep, for she was as white as snow, as red as blood, and her hair was as black as ebony. It happened, however, that the king's son came into the forest and went to the dwarf's house to spend the night. He saw the coffin on the mountain, and the beautiful little Snow White within it, and read what was written upon it in golden letters. Then he said to the dwarfs, Let me have the coffin. I will give you whatever you want for it. But the dwarfs answered, We will not part with it for all the gold in the world. Then he said, Let me have it as a gift, for I cannot live without seeing little Snow White. I will honor and prize her as my dearest possession." As he spoke in this way, the good dwarfs took pity upon him and gave him the coffin. Now the king's son had it carried away by his servants in their shoulders, and it happened that they had stumbled over a tree stump, and with the shock the poisonous piece of apple, which little Snow White had bitten off, came out of her throat, and before long she opened her eyes, lifted up the lid of the coffin, and sat up, and was once more alive. "Oh, where am I?" she cried. The king's son, full of joy, said, "You were with me." And I told her what had happened, and said, "I love you more than everything in the world. Come with me to my father's palace, and you shall be my wife." And little Snow White was willing, and went with him, and their wedding was held with great show and splendor. But the wicked queen was also bidden to the forest. When she had arrayed herself in the beautiful clothes, she went before the looking glass and said, looking glass on the wall, who in this land is the fairest of all?" The glass answered, "O queen of all here, the fairest art thou, but the young queen is fairer by far, I trow." Then the wicked woman uttered a curse, and was so wretched, so utterly wretched, that she knew not what to do. At first she would not go to the wedding at all, but she had no peace, and must go to the young queen. And when she went in, she knew little Snow White, and she stood still with rage and fear, and could not stir. But iron slippers had already been put upon the fire, and they were brought in with tongs and set before her. Then she was forced to put on the red-hot shoes and dance until she dropped down dead. Ay, ay, ay. That was quite the ending. My goodness. That was quite the ending. Yeah. It definitely, I've always loved the 10th Kingdom, and the 10th Kingdom pulled some of the stuff from um, the original Brothers Grimm story. I thought that was really cool how they did that. All right.